Hey, good evening all. This week I selected the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt as the topic for my 3 newspaper articles. I selected this not as a political jab, but because of the significance of this event during the midst of World War II. World War II saw approximately 16 million Americans in uniform. For the vast majority, Roosevelt was the only president for more than half of their lives. On April 12, 1945, President Roosevelt died suddenly while posing for a portrait. Doris Kearns Goodwin describes a scene that, even as the end was near, the president braved a smile before announcing a terrible pain in his head and collapsing. 2.5 hours later, President Roosevelt breathed his last, and his doctor pronounced him dead. All of the president's funeral arrangements were led by his Army Chief of Staff, George C. Marshall, who would make his first visit to the president's Hyde Park home in New York only after the president's death. The president is buried at his home in Hyde Park, which is now a National Historic Site, and co-located with his presidential library. His close advisor, Harry Hopkins, remarked to Robert Sherwood, "You and I have got something great we can take with us for the rest of our lives." My 3 articles come from 3 major newspapers in Chicago, New York, and Baltimore. The Chicago Defender is a historic, Chicago-based African-American newspaper. Nosey's article begins with a poem by a local woman named Jeanette James, in an era of Jim Crow laws and openly hostile politicians and politics. FDR reached out to black Americans in a way that had not been done since the Reconstruction era under President Grant. Nosey praises the protection, fairness, and possibilities that existed in Roosevelt's 12 years as president, and worries about the uncertainties under President Truman. Nosey speaks of restaurants closing early and others staying open late in the president's honor. He also speaks of a flurry of prayer services in black churches throughout Chicago, where parishioners pray for the nation and for Mrs. Roosevelt. The Baltimore Sun's article presents the thoughts and sorrows of Maryland's political, religious, and labor leaders from across the state. Starting with Governor O'Connor and Mayor McKeldin, O'Connor grieves the loss and equates the sacrifice and death as noble and real, just as real as soldiers who died on faraway lands. The mayor mourns the loss and reminiscent era of our own time, envisioning Roosevelt in Valhalla, and closes his remarks with thoughts of Mrs. Roosevelt. The bishops of Catholic and Episcopalian dioceses grieved the great man, and followed by a bevy of state representatives. The New York Times article mirrors the Sun, but primarily with national figures, including remarks by former President Hoover and Governor Dewey, honoring Roosevelt's service to the country. This post also includes senators and representatives from across the country. Even Republican senators like Arthur Vandenberg recognized Roosevelt's imperishable imprint and his amazing genius. The Times also shares the sentiments of the presidents of Harvard and Columbia universities, representatives from England, Russia, and France. The Russian ambassador Andrei Gromyko calls Roosevelt one of the greatest statesmen the world has ever known. The article also has comments from dozens of labor leaders. The most telling statements are possibly from Roosevelt's cabinet of top advisors who knew him a little more personally. Henry Morgenthau, who served the president for 14 years, 2 as governor and 12 as president, credited Roosevelt for the successful conduct of the war. Harold Ickes admired his steadfast strength during crisis, and Hopkins mourned his friend as so gallant and brave. George C. Marshall, who was also a professional who kept a professional distance, recalled Roosevelt as a great leader, and closed with, "No tribute from the Army could be so eloquent as hourly record of victories of the past few weeks." Thank you for joining me for this week's discussion.